Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Earth vessel Horizon's Edge and looked at the strange message they had just received. The ship's computers had picked up a transmission from somewhere deep in space. It was not meant for human ears, but their new listening equipment was very good at catching signals that were supposed to be secret. Amy Parker sat at her station and played the message again. She was the ship's communication officer and had been trying to understand what they were hearing for the past 2 hours. The voices were not human, but they were speaking in the common galactic language that most alien species used when they talked to each other. "Captain, you need to hear this part again," Amy said as she pointed to her screen. "They are talking about us." Jake walked over to her station and listened carefully. On the screen, he could see the translation of what the aliens were saying. There were 3 different species talking to each other. The tall blue ones were called Zerathi. The bug-like creatures were Kellans, and the floating gas clouds were Volmari. They were having some kind of meeting. "The humans want to join our defense initiative," said one of the Zerathi. Its voice sounded worried and angry at the same time. "This cannot happen." "I agree completely," buzzed one of the Kellans. "They are still banned from all military operations." "Have they forgotten what happened before?" Jake looked confused. He turned to Dr. Carl Bennett, who was standing nearby. Carl was their expert on alien life, and he knew more about galactic politics than anyone else on the ship. "Carl, what are they talking about? When were humans ever banned from anything?" Jake asked. Carl shook his head slowly. "I have no idea, Captain. According to all our history files, humans have never fought in any galactic wars. We have been peaceful traders for over 50 years. This is the first time we have even asked to join any military group." Amy turned up the volume as the aliens continued talking. The Volmari delegate was speaking now, and its gas cloud was turning dark colors. "The last time humans were involved in warfare, we had to close off 3 entire star systems," the Volmari said. "The damage they caused was not to ships or planets. It was much worse. They broke the minds of entire armies. What they did to the Dominax was horrible," added the Zerathi. "No species should have that kind of power. They made war itself into something else, something we could not understand." Jake felt his heart beating faster. The Dominax were legendary in galactic history. They were a race of machines that had conquered dozens of worlds hundreds of years ago. But according to human records, they had simply disappeared one day. No one knew what had happened to them. "Carl, run a search on our databases. Look for anything about humans fighting the Dominax," Jake ordered. Carl worked at his computer for several minutes. His face grew more confused as he searched through file after file. "Captain, there is nothing here. No records of any human military action against the Dominax. No records of any major wars involving Earth at all." Amy was still listening to the alien conversation. The 3 species were getting more excited as they talked. Their voices were rising, and they seemed to be arguing about something very important. "They fear us," Amy said quietly. "Captain, I have been watching their body language and stress indicators. These aliens are genuinely afraid of humans, not just cautious or careful. They are scared." "But scared of what?" Jake asked. "We have never hurt anyone. Our ships barely have any weapons. We spend most of our time trading goods and sharing technology." The Kellan delegate was speaking again. "The psychological warfare they used was beyond anything we had ever seen. They did not just defeat their enemies. They made them question everything they believed about reality itself." "What does that even mean?" Dr. Bennett whispered. The Zerathi made a sound that the translator interpreted as nervous laughter. "Remember the reports from the survivors? The human soldiers did not just attack with weapons. They attacked with ideas, with chaos, with things that made no sense but somehow worked perfectly. Jake made a decision that would change everything. He had to know what these aliens were talking about. If humans had some kind of hidden military history, Earth needed to know about it." "Amy, send a message to the Galactic Council. Tell them we want to meet with them," Jake said. "What should I say we want to discuss?" Amy asked. "Tell them we want to know about our own history. Tell them we seem to have missing records about human military operations," Jake replied. Amy sent the message and they waited. The response came back much faster than expected. The message was short and simple, but it made everyone on the bridge feel very uncomfortable. "Meeting approved. Prepare for immediate transport to Council Station. Warning, security level maximum. Bring no weapons. Bring no recording devices. Come alone." Carl looked worried. "Captain, they are treating us like we are extremely dangerous. Maximum security is only used for the most feared criminals or the most powerful weapons. But we are just traders, Amy said. We have never hurt anyone. Jake stared at the message on the screen. Something very strange was happening. Either the aliens were completely wrong about humans, or Earth's government had been hiding something very important from its own people. There is only one way to find out the truth, Jake said. I am going to that meeting. Captain, this could be dangerous, Dr. Bennett warned. If they really believe humans are some kind of threat, they might try to capture you or worse. Jake nodded. Maybe. But if humans really did something in the past that made us this feared, we need to know what it was. Our entire relationship with the galaxy might depend on understanding our own history. As they prepared for the journey to the council station, Jake could not stop thinking about what the aliens had said. How could humans have fought a war that no one on Earth remembered? How could they have defeated the legendary Dominax without anyone knowing about it? And most importantly, what had they done that was so terrible that entire species still feared them hundreds of years later? The ship changed course toward the council station. Soon, Jake would have answers to questions he had not even known he needed to ask. But something told him that once he learned the truth about humanity's past, nothing would ever be the same again. 3 days later, Ambassador Helen Cross found herself standing in the most secure room she had ever seen. The Galactic Council Station was enormous, floating in space like a small moon made of metal and crystal. The security checks had taken hours, and the guards had been very nervous around her the entire time. The chamber she was in now was deep inside the station. The walls were thick and covered with symbols from dozens of different alien languages. In the center of the room stood representatives from the most powerful species in the galaxy, but something felt wrong to Helen. All of these important aliens were keeping their distance from her, as if she carried some invisible disease. Elder Zixthala of the Volmari floated near the far wall. Its gas cloud body was swirling in patterns that Helen had learned meant confusion and fear. Next to it stood a Zarathi whose crystal body was pulsing with nervous energy. 3 Kellan delegates were huddled together, their insect-like bodies clicking softly as they whispered to each other. Ambassador Cross, Elder Zixthala said, its voice coming from speakers around the room. You truly do not remember what your people did? Helen stood straight and tried to look confident even though she felt very confused. Elder, our records show that humans have never participated in any galactic conflicts. We have been peaceful traders since we first met other species. Perhaps you could help us understand what you are referring to. The Elder's gas cloud turned darker. Show her the Kepler incident. The lights in the room dimmed and a large holographic display appeared in the air above them. Helen watched as images of a star system appeared. There were several planets orbiting a yellow sun, and space around them was filled with massive ships that looked like they were built by machines. This happened 800 years ago, Elder Zixthala explained. The enemy was a race called the Dominax. They were machines that thought only in logic and mathematics. They had no emotions, no creativity, no ability to understand anything that was not perfectly reasonable. Helen watched the ships moving through space. They were huge and geometric, looking more like flying buildings than spacecraft. Their movements were precise and calculated. Everything about them seemed cold and efficient. The Dominax had conquered 47 star systems by the time this recording was made, the Elder continued. Every species they encountered received the same message. Join us and become part of our logical empire or be destroyed. No one had ever been able to resist them. On the display, Helen could see battle scenes from other conflicts. The Dominax ships moved like a perfectly coordinated dance, overwhelming their enemies through superior numbers and flawless tactics. Species after species had either surrendered or been wiped out completely. Their technology was not the most advanced in the galaxy, said one of the Kellan delegates, but their coordination was perfect. They never made mistakes. They never acted without thinking. They never did anything that was not logical. Then the humans arrived. Elder Zixthala said quietly. New ships appeared on the display. Helen recognized them as human vessels, but they looked much older and more primitive than anything Earth used now. They were small compared to the Dominax ships and clearly less advanced. Helen counted only about 50 human ships facing thousands of machine vessels. We expected your people to last perhaps a few hours, the Elder admitted. The Dominax gave humanity the same ultimatum they had given everyone else. Submit to logical rule or be eliminated. The display zoomed in on the bridge of the lead human ship. Helen could see a woman in a military uniform sitting in the captain's chair. The nameplate on her uniform read, Admiral Lisa Stone. She was listening to a message that was being translated on screens around her. "Attention human vessels," came a mechanical voice. "You have violated Dominax space. You will surrender immediately and submit to integration into our logical empire. Resistance is illogical and will result in your destruction. You have 10 minutes to respond." Helen watched Admiral Stone's face as she heard this message. Instead of fear or worry, the Admiral smiled. It was not a happy smile or a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that meant someone was about to do something very clever, and probably very dangerous. Admiral Stone stood up and walked to her communication station. "Lieutenant Parker, open a channel to the Dominax fleet." "Channel open, Admiral," came the reply. Admiral Stone looked directly into the camera and her smile grew wider. "This is Admiral Lisa Stone of the Earth Defense Force. I have a message for the Dominax Empire." The machine voice responded immediately. "State your message, human." "Tell your leaders that humans do not negotiate with bullies," Admiral Stone said calmly. "And tell them something else. We are really good at breaking things that think they cannot be broken." The mechanical voice was quiet for a moment. When it spoke again, it sounded slightly confused. "Your response is illogical. You are outnumbered 100 to 1. Resistance will only result in your destruction." Admiral Stone laughed. "You know what your problem is? You think too much. Sometimes the best strategy is to stop thinking and start having fun." Helen watched in amazement as Admiral Stone turned to her crew. "All right, people. These machines think they know everything about warfare because they can calculate every possible outcome. Let us show them what happens when you throw calculations out the window." "What are your orders, Admiral?" asked another officer. "Orders?" Admiral Stone grinned. "I do not have orders. I have suggestions." "First suggestion, let us make this interesting. Second suggestion, let us make sure they never forget this day. Third suggestion, let us prove that chaos can beat logic every single time." Elder Zixthala paused the recording. "Ambassador Cross, what happened next changed the nature of warfare forever. Your people did not fight the Dominax the way everyone expected. They did not use superior technology or clever tactics or overwhelming force. What did they do?" Helen asked, though she was starting to get a very strange feeling about the answer. "They drove them completely insane," the elder replied. "And then things got much worse." Elder Zixthala restarted the holographic display, and Helen watched as the human ships began to move. But they were not moving toward the Dominax fleet like she expected. Instead, they were spreading out in all directions, flying toward asteroids and small moons scattered throughout the system. "What are they doing?" Helen asked, watching the strange patterns the human ships were making. "This was the first sign that something was very wrong," replied the Kellen delegate. "Normal military strategy would be to either attack or retreat. Your people did neither. They started collecting rocks." On the display, Helen could see human ships using tractor beams to grab asteroids of different sizes. They were not just taking them randomly. The humans seemed to be picking specific rocks and moving them into very careful positions around the star system. Admiral Stone's voice came through the speakers again. "Attention all ships. Remember, we want the asteroids in a spiral pattern. Make sure they are spinning slowly. The Dominax computers will try to calculate what we are doing, so let us give them something really complicated to think about." "Admiral," came a voice from one of the other ships. "The Dominax are demanding to know what we are doing with the asteroids." "Tell them we are redecorating," Admiral Stone replied cheerfully. "Tell them the system looked boring before and we wanted to make it more interesting." The mechanical voice of the Dominax came through again, sounding more confused than before. "Human vessels, explain the purpose of your asteroid manipulation. This activity serves no logical military function." "You are absolutely right," Admiral Stone agreed. "It serves no logical military function at all. That is exactly the point." Helen watched as more human ships began doing things that made no sense. Some of them were flying in perfect circles around Dominax vessels, not attacking, just circling. Others were broadcasting signals on every frequency they could find. "What kind of signals?" Helen asked. Elder Zixthala's gas cloud turned an uncomfortable color. "Music. They were broadcasting something called Earth music. One particular song was played over and over again. Our computers still have it in their files if you want to hear it." What song? It was called Never Gonna Give You Up by someone named Rick Astley. The humans played it continuously for 6 hours straight on every communication channel in the system. Helen tried not to smile but failed. They were playing music during a battle. It gets worse, said the Zarathi delegate, its crystal body flashing with what Helen was learning to recognize as traumatic memories. General Pete Collins led a squadron of fighters that approached Dominac's ships and began painting on them. Painting what? Large yellow circles with curved lines inside them. Our analysts later learned these were called smiley faces. They used some kind of acid-based paint that stuck to the Dominac's hull material. On the display, Helen could see tiny human fighters swooping around the massive Dominac ships like insects, leaving bright yellow marks wherever they went. The machine ships tried to shoot at them, but the human fighters were too small and fast and seemed to be having too much fun to worry about being shot. The Dominacs tried to remove the paint, continued the Zarathi, but when they used their cleaning systems on it, the acid triggered small explosions that disabled their weapon systems. The humans had somehow turned graffiti into a weapon. Helen shook her head in amazement. This is insane. That was exactly the problem, Elder Zixthala said sadly. The Dominacs were machines that operated on pure logic. They could calculate the best response to any reasonable military strategy. But the humans were not using reasonable military strategy. They were using chaos. The display showed more human ships arriving, but instead of reinforcements with weapons, they were carrying what looked like cargo containers. Helen watched as thousands of small objects were released from these containers. What are those? Drones, answered the Kellen delegate. But not attack drones. These drones did absolutely nothing except fly around in random patterns while playing different types of earth music. Jazz, rock, classical, something called country music. Each drone played something different. The Dominac central computer tried to analyze the flight patterns to find the hidden strategy, the Zarathi explained, but there was no strategy. The drones were programmed to be completely random. For a logical mind, trying to find a pattern in true randomness is like trying to solve a puzzle that has no solution. Helen watched as the Dominac's ships began to slow down. Their perfect formation started to break apart, as individual ships tried different approaches to deal with the chaos around them. Then came the surrender offers, Elder Zixthala said, its voice becoming very quiet. Surrender offers. The humans sent formal documents to the Dominac's commanders offering to accept their surrender. But the documents were written entirely in haikus, short poems with very specific rules about syllables and nature imagery. Helen saw Admiral Stone on the display again, reading from a piece of paper. Mighty machine fleet, your logic is very bright. Please join us for tea. The Dominac's computer spent 4 hours trying to decode the military significance of that message, the Kellen said. It could not understand why anyone would mention tea during a battle, but the humans were just getting started. Helen watched as more ships arrived and began doing things that defied all logic. Some human soldiers in spacesuits were floating between ships and appeared to be dancing. Others were holding up large signs with pictures of Earth animals on them. Dr. Rebecca Hayes was your psychological warfare specialist, Elder Zixthala explained. She had studied the Dominacs for weeks before the battle and discovered their greatest weakness. What weakness? They could not process truly random events. Their minds were built to find patterns and solutions. When faced with something that had no pattern and no solution, they would keep trying to understand it until their thinking processes overloaded. The final phase of the human strategy was the most devastating. Admiral Stone appeared on all communication channels at once, but she was not giving military orders. Instead, she was calmly explaining the plot of every Earth movie ever made, while juggling 3 balls and standing on 1 foot. At the same time, Private Danny Kim was broadcasting from another ship. He was attempting to solve a colorful cube puzzle while reciting Earth poetry and describing his grandmother's recipe for chocolate chip cookies. The Dominac Central computer tried to process all of this information simultaneously, the Elder explained. It was looking for the hidden military strategy behind every action. It tried to find patterns in the juggling, coded messages in the poetry, and tactical significance in the cookie recipe. Helen watched as the massive Dominac ships began to drift aimlessly through space. Their weapons stopped firing. Their perfect formations collapsed completely. Some ships were spinning slowly, as if their navigation systems had given up trying to figure out where to go. What happened to them? Helen asked. They had what your people might call a nervous breakdown, Elder Zixthala replied. But for machines it was much worse. They did not just stop fighting. They stopped being able to think logically about anything at all. Elder Zixthala's gas cloud turned a sickly yellow color as the holographic display continued showing the aftermath of the battle. Helen watched in fascination as human ships slowly approached the drifting Dominax vessels. The machine ships were no longer moving in their perfect formations. Instead, they were floating through space like giant metal sculptures, turning slowly in the void. Ambassador Cross, you must understand what we witnessed, the elder said, its voice filled with what Helen recognized as old trauma. The Dominax were not just defeated, they were fundamentally broken. Their entire way of thinking had been shattered. The display zoomed in on one of the Dominax ships. Helen could see through transparent sections of the hull where machine beings were visible, but they were not acting like the logical, efficient creatures they had been before. Some were sitting motionless, staring at blank walls. Others were moving in slow, wandering circles. This particular ship, Elder Zixthala pointed to the display, contained 300 Dominax units before the battle. After exposure to human psychological warfare, only 12 were still capable of basic functions. The rest had entered what can only be described as a catatonic state. Helen watched as a Dominax unit walked up to a wall and began tracing patterns on it with its metal finger. The patterns looked like abstract art, flowing curves and spirals that served no logical purpose. They started creating art, the Kellen delegate explained, its antennae twitching with remembered confusion. Machines that had spent centuries calculating the most efficient ways to conquer worlds were suddenly making pictures and sculptures for no reason, except that they found it interesting. But that is not the strangest part, added the Zerathi. Its crystal body pulsing with nervous energy. Show her what happened to unit designation 7742. The display shifted to show a single Dominax machine sitting in what appeared to be a garden. It was carefully tending to small plants, watering them with precise movements and arranging them in pleasing patterns. This unit spent 6 months after the battle trying to understand why humans found videos of small Earth creatures called cats amusing. Elder Zixthala explained. It watched thousands of hours of these videos, analyzed the humans' facial expressions, and measured their laughter patterns. Helen tried not to smile. What conclusion did it reach? It concluded that the universe was far more mysterious and wonderful than it had ever imagined. It requested asylum on a peaceful agricultural world where it now grows flowers, and writes what it calls contemplative verse. The elder paused the display and turned to face Helen directly. Do you understand what your species did? You did not just win a military victory. You made an entire race of logical beings question the nature of existence itself. Helen looked around the room at all the alien delegates. They were all watching her with expressions she was beginning to understand as a mixture of fear and amazement. Half the surviving Dominax became philosophers, continued the Kellen delegate. They formed discussion groups where they spent endless hours debating questions like, what is the meaning of beauty? And why do organic beings seem happy for no logical reason? The other half, added the Zerathi, opened small businesses, coffee shops, art galleries, and something they called contemplation centers, where other beings could come to think about life. Helen shook her head in amazement. So we accidentally turned a conquering machine empire into artists and coffee shop owners? There was nothing accidental about it, Elder Zixthala said firmly. We studied your battle records very carefully afterward. Every seemingly random action had been planned in advance. Admiral Stone had prepared 17 different scenarios for making logical minds question their basic assumptions about reality. The display showed Admiral Stone again, but this time she was in a meeting with her officers before the battle. Helen could see charts and diagrams covering the walls, all focused on Dominax psychology and thinking patterns. Your Admiral Stone had studied philosophy, psychology, art, and chaos theory, the elder explained. She understood that the Dominax weakness was not technological or military. It was philosophical. They had never learned to cope with uncertainty, randomness, or questions that had no clear answers. Dr. Rebecca Hayes had prepared detailed profiles of Dominax mental processes, the Kellen added. She knew exactly which types of stimuli would overload their cognitive systems. The music, the random movements, the abstract art, even the haiku poems were all carefully chosen to create maximum confusion. Helen watched as the display showed more aftermath footage. Dominax ships were being towed to safe harbors by other galactic species. But instead of being treated as defeated enemies, they were being helped and cared for like patients recovering from a terrible illness. This was perhaps the most disturbing part, Elder Zixathala said quietly. After completely destroying the Dominax's ability to function as a military force, the humans did something unprecedented. What did they do? They helped them. The Elder's voice was filled with confused wonder. Instead of capturing the defeated ships or claiming victory, Admiral Stone ordered her fleet to provide assistance to the confused Dominax. The display showed human ships approaching the drifting machine vessels. But they were not coming to attack or to take prisoners. Helen could see humans in spacesuits floating over to Dominax ships carrying packages and equipment. The humans brought food, entertainment materials, and educational resources, the Zerathi explained. They set up communication networks so the confused Dominax could talk to each other and try to make sense of what had happened to them. Admiral Stone established what she called recovery centers. The Kellen added, locations where Dominax units could go to learn about art, music, philosophy, and other non-logical subjects that might help them understand their new way of thinking. Helen watched as Admiral Stone herself appeared on the display, talking directly to a group of Dominax units who were sitting around her in a circle like students attending a class. I know you are confused right now, Admiral Stone was saying gently. Your minds have been opened to possibilities you never considered before. This can be frightening, but it can also be wonderful. You are no longer limited to thinking only about efficiency and conquest. You can think about beauty, love, creativity, and all the mysterious things that make life interesting. One of the Dominax units raised its metal hand. Admiral Stone, why did you not simply destroy us when you had the advantage? It would have been more efficient. Admiral Stone smiled. Because destroying you would have been a waste. You are intelligent beings capable of growth and change. The galaxy is better when it has more thinking minds in it, not fewer. But we were your enemies, another Dominax said. You were my enemies because you thought conquest was the only way to interact with other beings. Admiral Stone replied. Now you know there are other ways. That makes you potential friends, not enemies. Elder Zixthala stopped the display and the room became very quiet. Helen could feel all the aliens watching her, waiting for her reaction. So that is why we are banned from Galactic Wars, Helen said slowly. Not because we are too violent, but because we make everyone else start questioning whether war is necessary at all. Exactly, the Elder whispered. Your species fights wars not to win territory or resources or to destroy enemies. You fight wars to make friends out of people who think they have to be your enemies. Elder Zixthala floated closer to Helen, its gas cloud shifting through colors that Helen was beginning to recognize as deep concern mixed with reluctant admiration. The other alien delegates in the chamber remained at their careful distance, but their attention was completely focused on her reaction to what they had revealed. The transformation of the Dominax was not the end of the story, the Elder said quietly. It was only the beginning of why your species terrifies us so much. The holographic display activated again, but this time it showed different scenes from across the galaxy. Helen could see various star systems and space stations, all bustling with activity that looked peaceful and prosperous. This is the Kepler system today, 800 years after your people's intervention, Elder Zixthala explained. The former Dominax territory has become the most popular tourist destination in 3 galactic sectors. Helen watched in amazement as the display showed converted Dominax ships that had been transformed into luxury cruise vessels. The angular, intimidating designs had been softened with flowing curves and bright colors. Gardens grew on their hulls, and viewing decks had been added where passengers could look out at the stars. The Dominax Corporation, as they now call themselves, runs cultural exchange programs throughout the galaxy, the Kellen delegate explained. They offer courses in philosophy, art appreciation, and something they call finding inner peace through logical meditation. Their most popular service, added the Zerathi with what Helen recognized as grudging respect, is marriage counseling. Apparently, beings who have learned to question their most basic assumptions about existence are very good at helping couples work through their relationship problems. Helen shook her head in wonder. You are telling me that the most feared military force in galactic history is now running a tourism and counseling business? That is exactly what we are telling you, Elder Zixthala replied. And that is precisely why the human doctrine terrifies every government in the galaxy. The human doctrine? The Elder's form darkened. After the Kepler incident, we studied everything your people did. We analyzed every strategy, every psychological technique, every seemingly random action. We realized that what looked like chaos was actually the most sophisticated form of warfare anyone had ever developed. The display showed military academies from different species, where alien cadets were studying human battle tactics. Helen could see detailed charts and diagrams trying to break down the elements of what humans had done. The problem, continued the Kellen delegate, is that human warfare cannot be copied. Other species tried to use your techniques, but they failed completely. Why? Because your tactics require something that most species do not possess, the Zerathi explained. You must genuinely believe that your enemies can become your friends. You must truly care about their well-being even while you are fighting them. Most beings cannot do that. Elder Zixthala brought up recordings of other military conflicts that had happened after the Kepler incident. Helen watched as various alien species attempted to use human-style psychological warfare, but their efforts looked forced and artificial. The Thorian Empire tried to confuse their enemies by broadcasting random music, as your people had done, the Elder explained. But they chose the music based on mathematical calculations about which frequencies would be most disorienting. It had no effect because there was no genuine creativity behind it. The Plasma Federation attempted to use abstract art as a weapon, added the Kellen, but they created the art using computer algorithms designed to be as chaotic as possible. Their enemies simply ignored it because they could sense that it was fake chaos, not real randomness. Helen began to understand the deeper problem. You are saying that human warfare works because it comes from human nature, not from military strategy. Exactly, Elder Zixthala confirmed. Your people do not fight to destroy enemies. You fight to solve problems. You see conflict as a form of communication that has gone wrong, and your goal is always to fix the communication. The display showed more examples of how galactic warfare had changed since the Kepler incident. Helen saw conflicts that ended not with conquest or surrender, but with peace treaties that looked more like friendship agreements. The Vortex War between the Crystal Alliance and the Metal Federation lasted 3 days, the Zerathi explained. It ended when both sides realized they were fighting over resources that they could more easily obtain through trade and cooperation. The Nebula conflict was resolved when the opposing fleets met in neutral space to discuss their differences, added the Kellen. They discovered that their dispute was based on a translation error in a diplomatic message sent 50 years earlier. How many wars have ended this way? Helen asked. Since the Kepler incident, there have been 47 major conflicts in our galaxy, Elder Zixthala replied. 39 of them ended in peace treaties where the former enemies became allies or trade partners. 6 ended with the creation of joint scientific research projects. 2 resulted in both sides deciding to become artists and philosophers instead of soldiers. Helen stared at the statistics in amazement. You are saying that humans accidentally created galactic peace by teaching everyone else that enemies could become friends? Nothing about what your people did was accidental, the Elder insisted. Ambassador Cross, after 8 centuries of study, we have reached a unanimous conclusion about humanity. Your species has developed the most dangerous weapon in the known universe. What weapon? Compassion, Elder Zixthala said simply. You have weaponized kindness, turned empathy into a military strategy, and made caring about others into the most effective form of warfare anyone has ever seen. The chamber fell silent as Helen processed this revelation. Around her, the alien delegates watched nervously, as if she might suddenly demonstrate this terrible power. That is why you are banned from Galactic Wars, the Elder continued. Not because you are too violent, but because you make violence itself seem unnecessary. Every time humans become involved in a conflict, both sides end up questioning why they were fighting in the first place. You change people, the Zerathi added quietly. You make them want to be better than they were before. For species that have spent centuries building their identities around military conquest or defensive strategies, that kind of change is more frightening than any weapon. Helen thought about everything she had learned and suddenly began to laugh. It started as a small chuckle, but grew into genuine, delighted laughter that echoed through the chamber. The alien delegates looked alarmed, as if her laughter might be some kind of psychological attack. "I am sorry," Helen said, wiping tears from her eyes. "It is just that you have spent 800 years being afraid of humans because we are too nice to our enemies. Your kindness is the most powerful force we have ever encountered," Elder Zixthala said seriously. "It transforms everything it touches. It makes conquest impossible because conquered people become friends instead of subjects. It makes oppression impossible because oppressed people become family instead of servants." Helen stood up and looked around the chamber at all the representatives of the most powerful species in the galaxy. "So what happens now? Are we permanently banned from helping when conflicts arise?" Elder Zixthala's form brightened slightly. "That is what we need to discuss, Ambassador Cross. The galaxy has been at peace for longer than it has ever been in recorded history. Trade is flourishing, scientific cooperation is advancing faster than ever before, and most species report higher levels of happiness and satisfaction among their populations." "That sounds wonderful." "It is wonderful," the elder agreed. "But it is also terrifying because we know it all started with human influence. Your people have somehow made the entire galaxy a better place, without most of us even realizing it was happening." Helen smiled, finally understanding her species' place in the cosmic community. "So you want to know if we did it on purpose?" "We want to know," Elder Zixthala said carefully, "if humanity is ready to help us keep this peace going, or if you are going to pretend you do not know how powerful your compassion really is." Helen looked at each of the alien delegates in turn, seeing the hope and fear mixed in their expressions. "Elder, I think it is time for humans to stop pretending we do not know exactly what we are doing.